All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. We're getting into that discussion now, and let's bring up the question. The question is, who should keep the government accountable now and why? This is coming at a post-handshake point where the
post-handshake era.
Yes, where the Kiomtata says when the sharks call a ceasefire, the Omenas have nowhere to go. SMS 224222, the hashtag is Daybreak. You can call in live as well, 0719777777. You can tweet at Trevor Mbija, at Waiga Moura. We'll sample some of the views during this broadcast. I believe we have some coming through to our newsroom right now. If you can put it up, any response from the people who are watching right now, the question is, who should keep the government accountable and why? Before we get into that,
that's right,
sampling through the response, let's start from that point right there exactly. And I'll start with you. At this particular point, who's keeping government in check from where you stand, both as a media personality, as a citizen? Who's keeping government in check?
Or maybe we should ask, is government being kept?
Is it even being checked?
Yeah. So the big question is, we have to understand who's the public's watchdog. So is it the media? Is it the politicians? Is it the civil society? So once you understand or is it the citizen?
Yeah.
And how then would they do it?
So there's who is supposed to be and who should be.
Who should be and how is it supposed to be done? Right now, I would assume every patriotic citizen has a duty to keep the government accountable. But do they have the means to do so? So as a fact checker with Africa Check, we try to provide the means. And how we do that is we empower citizens with accurate information so that when they are confronting the politicians or they are talking to the civil society or when they are engaging in policy discussions, they have the facts on their hands. And essentially what we say we do is to promote honest public debate. And we try to make sure that that conversation is not polluted by misinformation. It's not polluted by fake news. And understanding that from the conceptual point where we understand the media, if I would call newsrooms and journlists and media houses.
Collective name, the media.
Yes, that collective name. If I would call them that, we understand the media from the point that the media in Kenya has its orientation to the European American model. And so that model has these shades where you have, they are sort of supporting the existing power structures. They are sort of pushing the hegemony. So they are sort of agents of the people in power. Yeah. So once you understand that, you get to see that sometimes the media may not act in public interest in the way they play stories, in the way they frame stories, and most of the times they do act in public interest. So whose interest in that public are they acting? That's a question that we need to clarify as we go along.
Let me get a brief response from you before I come to Honorable Nganga. In the post-handshake era, I like the way you put it, does media have to change its operation to continue to be a trustworthy source of information for the public?
They would.
Have they had to change? Do you feel there should be changes in the way the media operates in an environment where you cannot tell who is where doing what anymore?
They should be more aggressive, but there are structural and professional constraints that make it difficult for them to do what there is a vacuum.
Okay.
And we are all thinking, who's going to fill that vacuum in the media?
Hold that thought for a bit. We have a caller from Nairobi called Peter, but there's also the issue of impartiality versus truth. Where does the media stand? Peter is calling in. Peter, good morning.
Good morning, Trevor.
Yes, go ahead, your comment or question, Peter.
Okay, just to put my two very fast comments.
Yes.
Yeah, first I'm saying...
Go ahead.
It's... Okay, I'm saying the handshake was just to create the unity so that to allow development to occur.
Okay.
But we're feeling as youths of the country that generally there is a team with which I'm not going to be specific that is trying to frustrate everything. And I think it's our nature as Africans that each and every time we have elections, instead of putting a stop and focusing on development, an end of an election is totally a beginning of another political journey towards the oncoming election.
Okay.
And from what you can see,
All right.
there is a team, a small team in the government. Part of the team is the presidency.
Yeah.
That actually, instead of giving enough room for the government to perform its duties and the development, to give on the Big Four agenda to fulfill the presidential development unit,
Yeah.
this team is actually focusing on the 2022. And it's a big call to the handshake team. That was the president representing the Jubilee government and Raila Odinga, the prime minister, representing the opposition. It's a high time the presidency should take its side. The opposition should also take its side.
Peter, allow me to interject. And at this point, so now you've spoken about the handshake. Who checks the government from where you stand?
Okay, we must all agree that the government, the people who are mandated to check the government, such as the opposition, who should be the strong criticisms, is actually not even, I think, okay, I cannot say that the handshake tamed everything, but first we have to thank the media because on both negative and positive part of it, they all let us know.
All right.
So I think I can even assume that currently the media has taken part of the position who should be doing everything.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Peter. That's Peter from Nairobi.
Good. He says the handshake was to bring unity, but he feels that
hijacked.
Things that are frustrating that. You asked a question to Alphonse, which I'll come back to Alphonse just a bit later on to respond. Honorable Nganga, let me bring you into this particular discussion, even as you answer the question, who should keep the government accountable? On these same chairs that each of our guests are seated on today, we've hosted countless MPs over the last 1 or 2 years or so. And some of them have alluded to the fact that Parliament is toothless. It's been captured
by the executive.
It's no longer the people's defender. What are your thoughts from the platform that you now sit on in terms of keeping government accountable?
I'll start by putting everything into perspective the way they're supposed to be. Actually, let me start me. I'm in Jubilee. That one is a fact.
Okay.
Even if I'm not in Parliament.
So you declared your position?
No. I ran in that party, so I'm still a Jubilee person. And I want to say, when we came in 2013, there's those goals that we set that we were supposed to achieve this by this time. Even when they took over from 2017, this is what we are supposed to do. How many kilometers of roads, health care, this is how far we are supposed to do, industrialization, jobs, yes, this is how, food security, this is how far we are supposed to go. And true to the word, that is what they are trying to do. But
trying to do in 2019?
Yeah, listen. As we are trying to do this, the opposition has come in. And like before, it was healthy. It is like now, if you ask me, Trevor, if I go back to my constituency, the MP who is there, I'll put him on check. Because all the time he's doing this, I'm coming back and I'm trying to say, I was doing better. And with that, there's a healthy competition back at home, and you see things are being done. Why? Because I'm keeping him on check. Right now, there's nobody who is keeping the government on check. That one I can tell you, because all of us now are in the same house. So whatever we promise for healthcare, whether we are headed in the right direction, there's nobody who is telling us whether we are headed on the right directions. And you're asking now, who is keeping, even including the media. Even the media is also hijacked in this handshake. Because right now, we should be, in fact, if you ask me...
we were only on the steps of Harambee House
but this time, you try to be neutral. You don't want to say handshake is bad, and I'm also not saying handshake is bad. For that fact, for unity, for business, because if you go to town, at least you can see businesses are operating in the right direction. I don't oppose handshake, but I don't also say that the opposition should have stopped checking the government. Yeah, okay, we are together as a unity, we are united as a nation.
Yes.
But I should be telling you where you are not doing the right things.
How would you rate Parliament's performance?
Okay, let me come back to Parliament. You see, I think there is a confusion. When, like you're saying, when the handshake was done, it never trickled down to the rest of the people to know exactly what was the handshake. So when you go to Parliament, the Jubilee, of course, if you are a Jubilee, you say we are headed in the right direction because you are the one who have the government. This is what we set to do, this is what we are doing, and we are continuing doing. The short of that, the people who should be saying that in Parliament are the people who are sitting on the opposite side. Now we are all of us in this house, so we are singing the same song. So nobody even, in fact, I would say it is better when I was in Parliament, when we had opposition, when we were bringing something to Parliament, we knew that the other side is going to oppose it, or it is going to put its input. And then when we reconcile, or when we come in the middle, at least we have amended some few clauses to make it better. Right now, whatever that government is coming up with, that is what we are taking at this is the truth, or this is final. But before, I'll tell you right now, even but also they can come out, they can champion, they can come out from their cocoons and say this is not the right direction, we are not heading in the right direction. Because right now, as I tell you, there's nobody who is checking from executive to Parliament to wherever.
Very worrying.
There's nobody who's checking.
Okay, I'm sure you disagree with this because you've been trying to do your part, but as it stands, who else is checking?
Even the society has been hijacked.
What I would say, first of all, it's really totally false to say that the last Parliament checked by the government. What happens is that Parliament has failed to be distinct from the executive.
All through.
All through. You look at the kind of talk of vetting. The last Parliament that we had, they were just rubber stamping everything. Even this time, they're just rubber stamping. So basically, for me, what will check government is the rule of law. Even if you go to Europe, wherever, it's not the opposing politicians who check.
Or coalitions or whatever happens.
We have a constitution that prescribes limited power. That's where the limit is. And if the president today were to accept that he exercises limited power, that he'll obey the rule of law, everything will fall in place. Let Uhuru Kenyatta accept that he's a creature of the law, he's limited by the law, and he must operate within the law.
But this is coming at a time when court orders are being ignored left, right.
That's what I'm telling you. Because he does not respect the rule of law, nothing can be checked.
That's not true.
He's using the gun wrongly. When a court order is issued and a president ignores it, what are you telling the rest of the world?
But this is not just the president's role. It's not just him. There's also
he's the role model.
That have been given
even in the constitution, is not supposed to show us how these values are being realized. We have got a value-based system. Our system is value-based. And that's why every year, like the last time he went to the Parliament, he was supposed to go and tell us how has the government complied with Chapter 10.
With Chapter 10.
With the values and the principles of governance. That is what will check this country.
Okay,
when we come to individuals...
Yes. I want to interrupt you just to take a quick phone call, then I'll come back to your point on that. Richard from Meru, please give us your comment or question.
Good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wanted to say there's nobody that is keeping the government on check at the moment.
Okay.
And not even the media. And then that makes me ask the question, if everybody is in the government, shouldn't everybody else now take responsibility for the mistakes the government is making, including the handshake, everybody else, Raila inside, the president, all that, because they are making great mistakes? Now, shouldn't everybody take that responsibility? Because
you've singled out the media, let me ask you this. Why do you say the media is not playing its role? It sounds like you say not at all.
Yes.
Why?
Because the media is biased. It's biased in the context that they are not even asking the relevant question. For example, even the handshake itself. Nobody understands what the handshake entails. And the media, the people that were supposed to be interrogating that in details, have not done that. They just jumped in and supported everything. Even the media itself does not know what the handshake contains.
Okay.
That is why we are saying there is a confusion there.
Okay, Richard, thank you so much. That's Richard from Meru. Thank you for your comment. Okay, you have...
Okay. Let me tell you briefly. In one sentence, when I was in Parliament, you remember the security bill? The opposition did not like it. You remember what happened? Because they were really opposing it. At the end of the day, they amended the clause that the Jubilee government wanted to put in place, because there was that opposition. If you're doing this, we are opposing this. But right now, what is happening, there's nobody who is checking on what should be in place. And that is why you see, because this handshake, nobody said what was in handshake.
Is it the handshake alone that is the issue?
Why I'm saying this when it comes to Parliament, why it is handshake.
Okay, why? Okay.
When the president, when Mr. Odinga and Kenyatta came together, Mr. Odinga never went back to his group to tell them, yeah, this is what we agreed, but continue checking the government.
Okay.
So all of us now are in government, so we should be checking the government.
Okay, go ahead. Although Okia says that even before the handshake,
no.
Parliament was not.
Before you saw, every time we were fighting in Parliament because
even
I want to defend, you want to oppose.
Even the security laws that she's referring to had to be struck down by the High Court. It's the courts which struck it down. Yeah. And I want to show you another thing how Parliament is incapable of working. When we had that committee on elections, election laws reviews, so they called for public participation. I made a paper on whether a manual election is acceptable under the current constitution. Whether we have got whether the constitution anticipates a free and fair election, or whether the constitution anticipates a tamper-proof election as the threshold. I went to Parliament before the joint committee led by Senator Orengo and then Senator Kraitu, and I presented to them. And I showed them how a manual election under the current constitution is not achievable. Accurate, verifiable, simple, whatever those things, I interpreted those things. Yes. And I carried the day, and they even clapped for me. And they made a law. They made a law that captured what I had put in my paper. And the law was endorsed by the president. Then the crooks came up and began raising that this thing cannot work. They forced until we had that section 441B implemented in, because they wanted a mechanism to interfere with the elections. What was the handshake all about? Was it about Kenyans not living with each other? It was about Kenyans having a dispute over the outcome of the elections.
Electoral reforms.
So the handshake was a ceasefire over a specific dispute, which was a dispute over elections.
Okay.
It was not a ceasefire to say that stop stealing so that Wanjiku can have enough food on her table. It was not about that.
Okay. So I want to get in Dr. Kamau before we take that break. Hang on there.
Could just finish.
If you could just finish. Okay, briefly then.
I need to weigh in on, this conversation.
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So, for perspective, I need to say two important things. Number one, when we say we'll hold the government in check, by government I know we mean Jubilee government, because it's the one that is in power at the moment.
Although someone recently said that it's not Jubilee government, the government is for all its Jubilee administration.
Well, but Jubilee, but I know for purposes of this conversation we are talking about.
Go ahead, Dr.
From 2013, and for context, Jubilee government has not been keen on accountability, and I want to show you why. There have been deliberate measures by the Jubilee administration to emasculate and weaken all the institutions that have been put in place to check their power. And I'll give you examples. Started with media. We've heard of, witnessed hostile public rhetoric coming from the government. We have seen several attempts, no less than 4, laws passed in Parliament initiated by the government trying to weaken the ability of the media to hold the government to account. For civil society, we've also seen some laws, started with the controversy around the PBO that started earlier, but there has been deliberate measures, starting with what I call the hostile public rhetoric against civil society, including arrest and invasion of offices of civil society groups that would try again to hold the government to account. When it comes to the judiciary, again we have seen, starting with what they call the revisit agenda, the hostile rhetoric, talking about also denial of funding, or at least limited funding. That is another issue.
The transfer of judges.
Transfer of judges,
strong judges out of sensitive courts.
Yeah, so we know the conversation around that. Again, when you talk about interfering with independent bodies that have been set by the Constitution, again to check the power of the same government, I can tell you these have been deliberate measures. Now let's look at Parliament again. Initially, it was a tyranny of numbers that was used to rubber stamp every decision of the government. It started even before the handshake. We saw individuals who had questionable, integrity questions hanging around them, especially for the ambassadorial post. Parliament again rubber stamped these appointments without actually raising these questions and to compare, for comparison, the new ambassador to Kenya for the US. His confirmation took a very long time because Senate in the US is not just a rubber, conveyor belt rubber stamping every decision.
It was delayed considerably.
It will take time. We look at issues. So this is something that we need to understand when as we talk about the ability of the other institutions to hold the government to account. We will also need to see the role of the government in this. But the second issue, again for context that is important, James Madison said, one of the founding fathers of the US, that if people were angels, there would not be any need for government. But I would also want to say, if government officials or governments were also angels, there would be no need for checks and balances. The reason they set up checks and balances is to ensure that no arm of government is too powerful that would wield unchecked power. You know, that is something they did not like.
How
the
powerful
idea.
do you think the Jubilee government
And this is what I want to bring context.
Okay.
Where when we talk about the concept of separation of powers, judiciary, parliament, and the executive should be independent, but also, interdependent. Yeah. Now, what we have seen is the executive trying to co-opt parliament. And we had a very good example, classic example, where the public was opposed to the amendments around the finance bill, Finance Act. It came to parliament. The president knew the opposition, but they closed ranks, including, Kalonzo Musyoka and all those people. Against what they knew that people, people. So this is, in essence, executive co-opting parliament to ensure that Wanjiko's, will was subverted. So when you talk about holding government to account, it is for whose interest? Essentially, it is because we need to protect Wanjiko. We cannot trust human beings. That is why these systems have been set in place by the Constitution to ensure that nobody is exercising unchecked power. And like I said, this is what the government has been keen on, and that is why we keep seeing many of these things, and that is why Wanjiko's agenda has not been at the center, because in democracy, people are at the center of that democracy.
All right, let's take a quick break here on Daybreak. We'd like to hear from you. 22422, hashtag is Daybreak. Keep your views coming. We'll sample some of them during this broadcast. That quick break now. Right? That's right. Okay. Interesting. Interesting.